I hid my $15 estate before the ICU. Thank God I did my kids came after. With a notary and papers. My name is Lily Watson. 68 years old, and I built my $15 million estate from nothing but determination and grit over 4 decades. When I was rushed to intensive care last month, I thought my heart attack would be the worst of my worries. Little did I know that my own flesh and blood were circling like vultures, waiting for me to be vulnerable enough to sign away everything I had worked for. Thank God I had the foresight to protect my assets just weeks before. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I outsmarted my own children when they thought I was too weak to fight back. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin where everyone knew your business before you did. My parents worked at the local factory, honest people who taught me the value of hard work and integrity. We never had much, but they made sure I understood that your character matters more than your bank account. Those lessons would serve me well, though I never imagined how critically important they would become decades later. At 22, I married Richard Watson, my high school sweetheart. He was kind, supportive, and believed in my dreams, even when they seemed impossible. Within 6 years, we had 3 beautiful children. Amanda, my eldest, who always had her nose in a book. Zachary, my middle child, who could charm the birds from the trees, and Jessica, my baby, who had artistic talent that took my breath away. I loved them fiercely, completely, and without reservation. Every decision I made was with their future in mind. When Amanda started kindergarten, I found myself with a few hours each day to pursue something for myself. Interior design had always been my passion. Even when we could barely afford furniture, I had a knack for making our modest home look like something from a magazine using creativity instead of cash. Richard encouraged me to start small, so I began offering my services to friends and neighbors. Word spread quickly in our small community. Soon I was designing interiors for the wealthier families in town, then businesses, and eventually opened my own studio. It wasn't easy balancing motherhood with entrepreneurship. Many nights I worked until dawn, after the children were asleep, creating designs, managing budgets, and handling clients, while Richard took on more household responsibilities. As the years passed, Watson Interiors grew beyond anything I could have imagined. I expanded into commercial spaces, hired talented designers, and eventually opened offices in Chicago, Minneapolis, and New York. By the time I turned 50, my little startup had become a multi-million-dollar enterprise with over 100 employees. Every dollar earned represented countless sacrifices, missed school plays, working weekends, and relentless dedication. Richard was my rock through it all, believing in me when I doubted myself, celebrating every success, no matter how small. When the children were teenagers, he was diagnosed with lymphoma. For 3 years, he fought bravely while I juggled the business and his care. We thought he had beaten it until the cancer returned more aggressively. 8 years ago, I lost my best friend, my partner, my love. His death changed everything, though not in ways I could have predicted. The grief was overwhelming, but I had my children and the business to keep me going. At that point, my estate was worth about $15 million. The business itself valued at $9 million, our family home worth $2 million in investment portfolio of $3 million and $1 million in liquid assets. I took pride in what I had built, not just for myself, but for my children and eventual grandchildren. I hoped they would understand the value of what went into creating this legacy, the sleepless nights, the risks, the failures that preceded success. Money earned means something different than money given. That distinction would become painfully relevant in ways I never imagined. After Richard passed, I threw myself into the business even more, perhaps to outrun grief. I expanded into sustainable design, winning awards and further growing our reputation. Throughout those years, I made sure my children wanted for nothing. Amanda's Ivy League education, Zachary's 3 failed business ventures, that I financed Jessica's art studio in Manhattan. I supported their dreams without hesitation, just as my parents and Richard had supported mine. I believed I had raised them to understand the difference between valuing money and valuing what money represents: security, opportunity, freedom. As it turned out, I was wrong about many things, including the character of my own children. The first signs that something was amiss appeared gradually after Richard died. In retrospect, the red flags were waving frantically, but grief has a way of clouding judgment. Amanda had always been practical, analytical, focused on her career in pharmaceutical sales. She rarely showed interest in the family business beyond polite inquiries at holiday gatherings. Yet after the funeral, she started asking detailed questions about our company structure, profit margins, and my retirement plans. At first, I was touched, thinking she was finally taking an interest in my life's work. I shared financial reports, introduced her to my executive team, even invited her to board meetings. "Mom, have you considered taking the company public?" she asked during one of our Sunday brunches, casually stirring her coffee. "The valuation would be much higher." "The company is my legacy, Amanda," I replied. "I built it to pass down to you all, not to sell to strangers." She smiled tightly. "Just thinking about maximizing assets." That phrase, maximizing assets, would become a familiar refrain. Zachary changed too. My middle child had always been a dreamer, jumping from one passion to another. I supported each venture, writing checks for his organic cafe that closed within a year, his tech startup that never launched, his craft brewery that produced more debt than beer. After Richard died, the requests for loans increased in both frequency and amount. "Just 50,000 this time, Mom," he'd say, with that charming smile that reminded me so much of his father. "This investment is a sure thing. I'll pay you back double." The repayments never materialized, but my maternal instinct to help my son remained strong. Until I noticed the expensive watches, the sports car he couldn't afford on his non-existent income, the gambling receipts accidentally left in his jacket when he visited. Jessica, my artistic free spirit, had perhaps the most dramatic transformation. Her artwork, once passionate and raw, became commercially calculated. She cultivated a social media presence, showcasing a luxurious lifestyle in her Manhattan loft, attending gallery openings with celebrities, dining at exclusive restaurants. What her followers couldn't see were the maxed-out credit cards and the frequent calls asking me to help with rent for her multi-million-dollar apartment. "It's an investment in my brand, Mom," she'd explain. "Perception is reality in the art world." 6 months ago, I hosted a family dinner at the house where they all grew up. It had been too long since we were together, and I missed the warmth of family gatherings when Richard was alive. The meal began pleasantly enough, with updates on their lives and reminiscing about their father. Then Amanda cleared her throat and placed her wine glass down deliberately. "Mom, we've been meaning to talk to you about something important," she said, exchanging glances with her siblings. "Your estate planning." The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Suddenly, I wasn't their mother, but an asset to be managed. "Have you updated your will since Dad died?" Zachary asked, his tone casual, but eyes sharp. "Is the business still in your name only?" Jessica chimed in. "That could be a tax nightmare for us later." They peppered me with questions about trusts, executor's power of attorney, and advance directives. Not once did anyone ask about my health, my wishes, or my plans for my own future. It was as if they were already dividing the spoils, while I sat there still very much alive. "I have everything in order," I said, finally ending the conversation. "Grace is handling all the legal matters." Their faces changed at the mention of Grace Hamilton, my closest friend since college, and a formidable attorney who had helped build Watson Interiors from its legal foundation. They knew Grace was fiercely protective of me. As they left that night, kissing my cheek and thanking me for dinner, An unsettling feeling lodged in my chest. These adults wearing my children's faces were strangers to me. The next morning I called Grace and asked her to meet for lunch. "I need to talk about my children," I said. "Something doesn't feel right." Grace listened without interruption as I detailed my concerns over seafood at our favorite restaurant. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her expression grave. "Lily, what you're describing sounds like the early stages of elder financial abuse," she said carefully. "I see it in my practice more often than you'd think, and unfortunately, family members are usually the perpetrators." I pulled my hand away defensive despite having voiced the concerns myself. "They're my children, Grace. They wouldn't steal from me." Grace's eyes softened. "Not steal, perhaps, but they might rationalize that they're just accessing their inheritance early or convincing themselves they know better how to manage your affairs. The end result is the same." The truth of her words stung like antiseptic on an open wound. I thought of Amanda's sudden interest in company financials, Zachary's unexplained cash flow, Jessica's fabricated lifestyle. What if my intuition was right? What if my own children were plotting to take control of everything I had built? "I don't want to believe it," I whispered. "Then let's find out for sure," Grace replied, "before we make any moves." Over the next few weeks, Grace employed a discreet financial investigator to look into my children's situations. The findings devastated me more thoroughly than I could have imagined. Amanda, always the responsible one, had gone through a messy divorce last year that she never told me about. Her ex-husband received half of their assets plus substantial alimony. She had remortgaged her house twice and was 3 months behind on payments. Her pharmaceutical sales job was on thin ice after missing quotas for 2 consecutive quarters. Zachary's situation was even worse. The investigator uncovered gambling debts exceeding $300,000 owed to the kind of people who don't send polite reminders when payments are late. He had already taken loans from several predatory lenders with astronomical interest rates. His name appeared on a rental agreement for an apartment I knew nothing about, where he was apparently living with a girlfriend, 20 years his junior, who had her own history of financial fraud. Jessica's glamorous social media life was the most elaborate fiction of all. Her art wasn't selling, and galleries were dropping her. The luxurious loft was 3 months from foreclosure. Her celebrity friends were paid acquaintances for photo shoots. Behind her designer clothes and caviar posts was a mountain of debt and several lawsuits from creditors. When Grace presented me with the full report, I wept for hours. Not just for the financial disasters my children had created, but for the painful reality that they had been lying to me for years, painting fictional lives while plotting to access my money by any means necessary. "What do I do now?" I asked Grace when the tears finally subsided. She laid out a plan so comprehensive it took my breath away. We would create an irrevocable trust for the majority of my assets with a corporate trustee rather than an individual. We would restructure the business ownership through a complex series of LLCs. We would establish a living will with crystal-clear directives about financial decisions should I become incapacitated, naming Grace and a professional fiduciary as co-guardians. "Is all this really necessary?" I asked, overwhelmed by the legal fortifications she proposed. "Lily," Grace said gently, "you built an empire from nothing. Now we need to protect it even from those you thought you could trust unconditionally." The process took weeks. Each signature felt like a betrayal of the family I thought I had. Each legal document represented another brick in the wall between me and my children. But with each revelation about their financial desperation, my resolve strengthened. I wouldn't let 4 decades of work be squandered by those who hadn't earned it. We completed the asset protection plan just 2 weeks before my world literally stopped. None of my children knew about these changes. As far as they were concerned, everything remained accessible through the right legal maneuvers. In their minds, I was just an aging mother with a fortune ripe for the taking. How could I have known that my caution would be tested so soon that the legal shields we meticulously constructed would face their trial by fire before the ink had barely dried? The morning of my heart attack began like any other Tuesday. I had breakfast on the patio enjoying the spring flowers in my garden. I reviewed designs for a new hotel project, made calls to clients, and planned to meet my project manager for lunch. The pain started subtly, a tightness in my chest that I mistook for indigestion. Within an hour, it had transformed into crushing pressure that radiated down my left arm, exactly as described in every medical warning I'd ever read, but never thought would apply to me. I was alone in my house, the housekeeper's day off. The phone seemed miles away, though it sat on the coffee table. Each movement intensified the pain, but survival instinct propelled me forward. I managed to dial 911 before collapsing onto the sofa. "Heart attack, alone," was all I could gasp to the dispatcher. The ambulance arrived in minutes that felt like hours. Oxygen mask sirens, concerned faces hovering above mine. In the emergency room, everything moved in chaotic precision. Blood tests, electrocardiograms, injections, and finally, the words that confirmed my fear. "You're having a significant cardiac event, Ms. Watson. We need to take you to the catheterization lab immediately." I remember thinking of Richard, wondering if I would join him soon. I thought of my business, my employees, my unfinished projects, and yes, I thought of my children, wondering who would call them if I didn't survive. I woke up in the intensive care unit, surrounded by beeping machines, and the antiseptic smell that permeates all hospitals. A cardiologist explained that I had suffered a major heart attack. They had placed 2 stents in my coronary arteries. The next 48 hours would be critical. "We've contacted your family," the nurse told me. "Your daughter Amanda said they're on their way." In my medicated haze, I felt a flicker of warmth. Whatever our issues, they were coming. They still cared. Amanda arrived first, her business suit impeccable as always. She kissed my forehead, asked the doctors pointed questions about my condition, and made notes on her tablet. She seemed genuinely concerned, though her eyes darted to my monitors and charts with analytical precision. "The company," I whispered through cracked lips. "Tell Edward to handle the Miller project. Don't worry about that now," she said soothingly. "Just focus on getting better. We'll take care of everything." Something in her tone sent a warning signal through my fog of medication. Take care of everything? How? The protective instincts that had led me to secure my assets flared again. Zachary arrived that evening unusually subdued. He brought flowers that must have cost hundreds, a strange choice for someone I now knew was drowning in debt. He sat by my bed holding my hand and telling me about a new business opportunity that was guaranteed to change everything. Even as I drifted in and out of consciousness, I noticed he was researching something on his phone whenever he thought I was asleep. Jessica flew in from New York the next morning, designer sunglasses hiding her eyes even in the dimly lit ICU. She was uncharacteristically attentive, adjusting my pillows and blankets, offering to call the nurse for pain medication before I asked. "I can stay as long as you need, Mom," she assured me. "My schedule is totally clear." Another red flag. Jessica never had a clear schedule, always rushing between gallery meetings and social events crucial to her brand. As my mind gradually cleared from the initial medications, I began noticing their whispered conversations in the hallway. A nurse I particularly liked, Sophia, mentioned casually that my children had been asking detailed questions about my condition prognosis, and especially my mental clarity. "They seem very concerned about your decision-making capacity," Sophia said, adjusting my IV. I told them many heart attack patients experience temporary confusion, but it usually passes. She gave me a meaningful look. Are you feeling confused, Ms. Watson? I squeezed her hand. Clear as a bell, Sophia, and getting clearer by the minute. That night, I pretended to be asleep when my children gathered in my room, speaking in hushed tones they thought I couldn't hear. The doctors say she's stabilizing, Amanda whispered. We need to move quickly before she's fully alert. Tomorrow, Zachary agreed. I've arranged everything. What if she refuses? Jessica's voice trembled slightly. She won't, Amanda replied firmly. Not if we present it correctly. She's vulnerable, medicated, and scared. She'll sign. Sign what? In that moment, lying helpless in a hospital bed with tubes and wires connecting me to machines that kept me alive, I understood with perfect clarity what was happening. The asset protection plan Grace and I had implemented wasn't paranoia. It was providence. On the third day of my ICU stay, my children arrived together shortly after lunch. They were dressed formally, as if for a business meeting. Amanda carried a leather portfolio folder. Zachary kept checking his watch. Jessica's smile seemed plastered on, not reaching her eyes. Behind them trailed a short, balding man I'd never seen before, clutching a notary stamp. Mom, you're looking so much better today, Amanda beamed, setting the folder on my hospital tray. We've been so worried. Zachary adjusted my pillows with unusual attentiveness. The doctors say you're making progress, but you'll need lots of care during recovery. Jessica took my hand, her eyes brimming with what looked like genuine tears. We just want what's best for you, Mom. You know that, right? Their concern would have been touching if I hadn't overheard their late-night plotting. I decided in that moment to play along to seem more confused and medicated than I actually was. I let my eyes drift slightly, my speech slur a bit. Who's that? I mumbled, gesturing weakly toward the stranger. This is just Frank, Amanda said dismissively. A family friend who's helping us with some paperwork. Nothing for you to worry about. Frank nodded nervously, avoiding eye contact. I noticed he kept his notary stamp partially hidden in his jacket pocket. Paperwork, I echoed faintly. Just some documents to help manage things while you recover. Zachary explained, his tone dripping with false casualness. Standard stuff. The doctor said you might need several months of rehabilitation. Amanda opened the folder and spread several legal documents before me. I deliberately didn't reach for my reading glasses, forcing her to explain. This first one is just a temporary power of attorney, she said, pointing to signature lines clearly marked with flags. So we can handle medical decisions if you're not feeling up to it. I nodded vaguely, noting that the document in question was far longer and more complex than a standard medical power of attorney. The words irrevocable and all assets were visible even to my supposedly compromised vision. And this one? I asked, pointing to another thick document. Just something to help us manage the business while you focus on getting better. Jessica jumped in. The Miller project is at a critical stage, remember? I did remember, of course, but the document before me had nothing to do with the Miller project or day-to-day business operations. Even with deliberately unfocused eyes, I could make out phrases about transfer of ownership and dissolution of current management structure. Sign here, Mom, Amanda urged, placing an expensive pen in my hand. We can explain all the details later when you're feeling stronger. I allowed the pen to tremble in my grasp, playing into their perception of my weakness. What about Grace? I asked innocently. Shouldn't she review these? A flash of annoyance crossed Amanda's face before she composed herself. Grace is on vacation, remember? Besides, these are time-sensitive. The business needs decisions now, not when Grace gets back. Another lie. Grace was very much in town and not on any vacation. The desperation in their scheme was becoming more evident by the second. Jessica leaned closer, her voice honey-sweet. Mom, just sign this power of attorney and we'll take care of everything. You don't need to worry about a thing. We can liquidate unnecessary assets for your care, Zachary added, revealing more than he intended. The house is really too big for you anyway, now that we're all grown. In that moment, the full extent of their betrayal crystallized. They weren't just seeking temporary control during my recovery. They were attempting to seize my entire estate, to sell my home, to dismantle my business, all under the guise of caring for their vulnerable mother. The three people I had sacrificed everything for were trying to steal 4 decades of my life's work, while I lay connected to heart monitors. I might have broken down right then if Sophia hadn't entered to check my vitals. Her timing couldn't have been more perfect. She took one look at the scene, her experienced eyes noting Frank's notary stamp and the legal documents spread across my tray. "I'm sorry, but Ms. Watson needs her rest now," she said firmly. "Doctor's orders. You'll need to continue this later." "But we just need a few signatures," Amanda protested. "It's important family business." Sophia was unmoved. "More important than your mother's recovery. The doctor was very clear about minimizing stress. Whatever this is, it can wait." After a tense standoff, they gathered the unsigned documents. "We'll come back tomorrow, Mom," Zachary said, squeezing my hand a little too tightly. "Just rest." As they filed out, Frank the notary had the decency to look ashamed. Jessica lingered last conflicted emotions playing across her face before she too departed. When I was finally alone, the tears came. Not delicate, dignified tears, but body-racking sobs that set off the heart monitors and brought nurses running. The pain in my chest from the heart attack was nothing compared to the agony of confirming that my own children saw me as nothing more than a fortune to be claimed. Through my tears, I reached for my phone and sent a text message consisting of just 2 words: "They came." Grace would understand exactly what I meant. Within an hour of my text, Grace arrived at the hospital like an avenging angel in a tailored suit. She wasn't alone. Behind her followed 2 people she introduced as Robert Chen, a forensic accountant, and Diana Patel, a specialist in elder law. They were part of the protective team we had assembled weeks earlier, though I had hoped their services would never be needed. "Tell me everything," Grace demanded, pulling a chair close to my bed. Her familiar presence was more comforting than any medication. I recounted the entire episode, from my children's suspicious behaviors to the documents they had tried to trick me into signing. Robert took notes while Diana examined copies of my medical charts that Sophia had provided with my permission. "Classic undue influence scenario," Diana commented. "Approaching you when medicated, bringing a notary to an ICU, misrepresenting legal documents. And attempting to do so without notifying your established attorney," Grace added. "That alone raises serious red flags." Robert looked up from his notebook. "Based on your description of the documents, they were attempting to gain control of substantially more than just medical decisions. This appears to be a coordinated effort to access the entire estate." The clinical way they discussed my children's betrayal helped me process it with some emotional distance. These weren't just my children anymore. They were adults attempting fraud against a vulnerable person. That this vulnerable person happened to be their mother only made their actions more reprehensible. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice stronger than it had been all day. Grace's plan was both compassionate and strategic. We would not confront them immediately. Instead, we would gather evidence of their intentions. Diana would stay nearby, ostensibly as a hospital advocate, helping me navigate medical decisions. Robert would monitor any attempts to access business accounts or property records. Grace would prepare legal responses to whatever documents they returned with. "Let them show their full hand," Grace advised. "The more evidence we have, the stronger our position." Over the next 2 days, my physical condition improved steadily. The doctors were pleased with my recovery and began discussing discharge plans. My emotional state remained fragile, but having Grace and her team nearby provided strength. Sophia and several other nurses became unofficial members of my protection squad, ensuring my children were never alone with me and reporting any suspicious questions or behaviors. On the 5th day of my hospitalization, true to their word, my children returned. This time they brought not only Frank, the notary, but also a man who introduced himself as Jeffrey Burns, an estate attorney I had never met or hired. The documents they presented were even more brazen than before, essentially transferring all decision-making authority to Amanda with Zachary and Jessica as secondary agents. "Mom, the doctors say you might need weeks of rehabilitation," Amanda explained soothingly. "These papers just make sure everything keeps running smoothly while you recover." "We've consulted with a top estate attorney," Zachary added, nodding toward Burns. "He assures us this is standard procedure in situations like yours." What they didn't know was that Diana was sitting quietly in the corner, introduced to them simply as my patient advocate. They also didn't know that Grace was waiting just outside, ready to enter at my signal. And they certainly didn't know that our protective trust had already placed my assets well beyond their reach, regardless of what I signed. I looked at each of their faces, searching for the children. I had raised the babies I had nursed, the teenagers I had guided through heartbreaks and triumphs. Instead, I saw only strangers wearing familiar features, their eyes calculating my worth in dollars rather than love. "Before I sign anything," I said, clearly setting down the pen Amanda had pressed into my hand, "I'd like Grace to review these documents." Their reactions told me everything. Amanda's face tightened. Zachary swore under his breath. Jessica looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "Grace is still unreachable," Amanda insisted, "and these matters are time-sensitive." I reached for the call button beside my bed. "That's strange because I just spoke with her this morning. In fact, she should be here any minute." As if on cue, Grace walked in impeccably dressed and radiating authority. Behind her came Robert, carrying a briefcase full of documentation about our asset protection plan. The atmosphere in this room changed instantly from predatory to defensive. "What is this?" Amanda demanded, standing to face Grace. "Mom's confused. The doctors confirmed she's experiencing cognitive effects from her medication." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you told the notary? Because falsifying a medical condition to gain financial advantage is fraud, Amanda, just like attempting to secure power of attorney under false pretenses." "We're just trying to help," Zachary protested. "Mom needs someone to manage things while she recovers." "That's already taken care of," Grace replied coolly. She nodded to Robert, who opened his briefcase and began laying out documents on the bedside table. "Ms. Watson established a comprehensive incapacity plan weeks ago with a professional fiduciary and myself as co-agents." The color drained from Amanda's face as she realized the implications. "Weeks ago? But that's before—" "Before my heart attack," I finished for her. "Yes, it was. Before any of you knew I would be vulnerable in a hospital bed. Before you could implement whatever scheme you've been planning since your father died." Jessica began to cry, whether from shame or frustration I couldn't tell. "Mom, you don't understand. We just wanted to secure what's rightfully ours." "Rightfully yours." My voice rose despite my best efforts to remain calm. "The business I built from nothing, the investments I made by sacrificing vacations, new cars, and personal luxuries, the home I maintained as a safe haven for all of you, none of that is rightfully yours until I decide to give it to you, or until I die. And I'm very much alive despite your best efforts to capitalize on my illness." Burns the attorney and Frank the notary exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly realizing they had been drawn into something unethical. Diana chose that moment to stand and introduce herself properly as an elder law attorney specializing in financial abuse cases. Gentlemen, she addressed Burns and Frank. I suggest you reconsider your participation in this matter. The evidence suggests a coordinated attempt to exploit a medically vulnerable individual, which carries serious legal consequences in this state. The notary grabbed his stamp and practically ran from the room. Burns gathered his papers more slowly, mumbling apologies. Left alone with my children and my protective team, the confrontation I had been dreading finally unfolded in its full, painful glory. Why? I asked simply. Why would you do this to me? The facade crumbled then. Amanda admitted to massive debt from her divorce and failed investments. Zachary confessed to the gambling addiction that had him fleeing from loan sharks. Jessica revealed the house of cards that was her art career and social media persona. We were desperate, Amanda said, tears finally breaking through her composed exterior. When you got sick, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to solve everything at once. By stealing from me, I asked. By taking advantage of what you thought was my weakened mental state. We never saw it as stealing, Zachary insisted. Just accelerating the inevitable. It's all going to be ours eventually anyway. That's where you're wrong, I said quietly. Nothing is inevitable, especially not after this betrayal. I explained that not only had I protected my assets from their scheme, but I was now forced to reconsider my entire estate plan in light of their actions. The business they had hoped to liquidate for quick cash would now likely go to my loyal employees through an ownership transition plan. The home they had planned to sell would probably be donated to a foundation supporting women entrepreneurs. The investments they had counted on might now fund scholarships for students from backgrounds like mine who understood the value of building something rather than taking it. You never trusted us, Jessica accused, anger replacing her tears. Setting up secret trusts proves you never had faith in us. I wanted to trust you, I corrected her. I desperately wanted to be wrong about my suspicions. But today you've proven that my caution wasn't just justified. It was necessary. The meeting ended with security escorting them from my room at Grace's request. Their parting words ranged from Amanda's cold, "This isn't over," to Jessica's broken, "I'm sorry, Mom," to Zachary's bitter, "You'll regret this." I watched them go, these strangers who shared my blood but apparently none of my values, and felt a complex mixture of heartbreak, rage, and a strange sense of liberation. The truth once faced has power. I had built my fortune through hard work, determination, and integrity. I would not see it destroyed by those who had never understood its true value. Grace stayed with me after they left, holding my hand in silence as I processed the enormity of what had transpired. You did what you had to do, she said finally. They gave you no choice. They're still my children, I whispered. Yes, she agreed. And that's why this hurts so much. But Lily, you protected more than just your assets today. You protected your legacy. You stood up for the values you've lived by your entire life. As night fell and the hospital quieted around me, I realized that while my heart had been physically damaged, its capacity for strength remained intact. I had survived this betrayal just as I had survived losing Richard, just as I had survived every business setback and personal challenge. I would survive this too, and perhaps eventually find a way to rebuild relationships with my children, if they ever recognized the wrongness of their actions. For now, though, I needed to focus on physical healing, knowing that the emotional healing would take much longer. I closed my eyes, exhausted but resolute. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same determination that had built a $15 million estate from nothing but hard work and dreams. The weeks that followed my confrontation with my children were a time of physical recovery and emotional recalibration. I was discharged from the hospital to a rehabilitation facility where I spent 3 weeks regaining strength and adapting to new medications. My medical team was cautiously optimistic about my prognosis, provided I made significant lifestyle changes and managed stress effectively. Ironic, considering the greatest source of stress in my life had been unmasked and addressed, albeit in the most painful way imaginable. During those weeks, Amanda attempted to contact me twice through formal letters delivered by her assistant. Both contained legal language demanding reconsideration of my rash decisions and thinly veiled threats of contesting any changes to my estate plan. Grace advised me not to respond and added the letters to our growing file of evidence. Zachary disappeared entirely, his phone disconnected, his apartment vacated, according to the private investigator Grace had retained. I worried for his safety, given his gambling debts, but his occasional social media posts from Las Vegas suggested he had found some means of temporarily evading his creditors. Jessica was the only one who reached out with something resembling genuine remorse. Her text messages were rambling, emotional, and inconsistent, alternating between apologies and accusations, between accepting responsibility and blaming her siblings for pressuring her. I responded once, suggesting she seek professional help for the underlying issues that had led to her deceptions, both to me and to herself, through her fabricated online persona. As my physical strength returned, so did my determination to rebuild what had been shaken by this family earthquake. Grace and I spent hours revising my estate plans, this time with even greater protections and clear provisions for how my assets would be used to continue my values, not just transfer wealth. What surprised me most during this recovery period was the support that emerged from unexpected places. Edward, my company's operations manager for 15 years, visited daily, bringing updates that kept me connected to the business that had been my life's work. Sophia, the ICU nurse who had been so protective, continued checking on me even after I transferred to rehabilitation. My next-door neighbor, Martha, a widow herself, brought home-cooked meals to the rehabilitation center and gossip from our neighborhood that kept me laughing despite everything. When I finally returned home after nearly a month away, I found my garden tended, my refrigerator stocked, and my longtime housekeeper, Louisa, practically moved in to ensure I followed doctor's orders. These people, none of them related to me by blood, showed me what family truly means through actions, rather than claims of entitlement. The emotional wounds remained raw. Nightmares about hospitals and betrayal interrupted my sleep. Memories of happier times with my children would ambush me unexpectedly, bringing tears when I least expected them. I felt like a failure as a mother, questioning every parenting decision I had made. Had I indulged them too much? Had I focused too much on the business and not enough on instilling values? Where had I gone so terribly wrong that my own flesh and blood could see me as nothing more than a walking checkbook? Grace, ever practical, suggested I join a support group for victims of family financial abuse. "You're not alone in this," she insisted, "and hearing others' stories might help you process your own." Reluctantly, I attended a meeting at a community center downtown. There I found a dozen others, mostly elderly, whose stories mirrored mine in devastating ways. Adult children draining bank accounts while their parents were hospitalized. Grandchildren manipulating grandparents with dementia into signing over homes. Siblings blocking vulnerable family members from accessing their own money. Patricia, a retired teacher in her 70s, shared how her son had convinced her to add him to her accounts just in case, and then systematically emptied them while she underwent cancer treatment. "The hardest part," she told us, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes, "is accepting that someone you love values money more than your relationship." Her words resonated deeply. In that room full of strangers who understood precisely what I was experiencing, I found unexpected strength. If they could survive this particular heartbreak, so could I. I began attending regularly, eventually sharing my own story and finding that the telling itself was therapeutic. As months passed, I gradually re-engaged with my company, though with a different perspective. I began mentoring younger designers, particularly women from disadvantaged backgrounds, who reminded me of my younger self. I established a formal employee ownership program that would gradually transfer company control to those who had helped build it, ensuring Watson Interiors would outlast me with its values intact. The foundation I created, initially born from anger and a desire to redirect my estate away from my children, evolved into something more meaningful. The Watson New Beginnings Foundation provided both financial assistance and business mentorship to older women starting over after setbacks. Many were emerging from divorces, career losses, or family estrangements, determined to build something meaningful despite their wounds. I found purpose in showing them that resilience improves with age like fine wine. 6 months after my heart attack, Jessica called. Unlike her previous communications, she sounded clear-headed and subdued. "I've been in therapy, Mom," she said, after an awkward exchange of pleasantries. "Twice weekly. It's been illuminating." She explained that after our confrontation, she had finally faced her spiraling financial situation and underlying issues with self-worth. She had moved out of the expensive Manhattan loft into a modest Brooklyn apartment, taken a job teaching art to children, and begun creating artwork for herself rather than for social media validation. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said toward the end of our conversation. "I'm not even asking for it yet. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to understand why I did what I did, and to become someone different than who I was that day in the hospital." It was the first step in what would become a carefully negotiated reconciliation. We agreed to monthly phone calls, then occasional lunches in public places, always with clearly defined boundaries. Trust once shattered could only be rebuilt in the smallest of increments, if at all. Amanda and Zachary remained distant. Amanda sent formal birthday and holiday cards that read like business correspondence. Zachary surfaced occasionally to ask for money, which I declined to provide, instead offering to pay directly for addiction treatment, which he always refused. I kept the door open for genuine reconciliation while maintaining firm boundaries against further exploitation. A year after the heart attack that nearly killed me but ultimately saved me from a different kind of death, I sat in my garden reflecting on the journey. The business was thriving under a shared leadership model. The foundation had already helped 30 women launch new careers. My health had stabilized with medication and lifestyle changes. The pain of betrayal had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something more manageable, something that informed my decisions without controlling them. I had stopped questioning where I went wrong as a mother, and instead focused on what I could still do right in the life remaining to me. That evening, as I updated my journal, I wrote, "Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't blind trust, but having the courage to set boundaries that protect both your heart and your legacy. Money reveals character, it doesn't create it. And while I lost the family I thought I had, I found the strength I never knew I needed." The wealth I had accumulated over 40 years still mattered to me, not as a measure of success, but as a tool for creating meaning. By protecting it from those who would have squandered it, I preserved its power to do good, to create opportunity, to embody values that transcend dollar amounts. My story isn't over. None of our stories ever are until the final breath. But if my experience teaches anything, it's that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to protect what you've built, and to redefine family based on love and respect rather than biology alone. If you've ever felt vulnerable, exploited, or undervalued by the very people who should cherish you most, know that you're not alone. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to protect yourself from family members who saw you as a resource rather than a person? What boundaries have you established to preserve your well-being? Please like this video. If my story resonated with you, subscribe to hear more life experiences and share with someone who might need to hear that. It's okay to protect what you've earned. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, true wealth is measured not in dollars, but in the integrity with which you live your life.